Welcome back to Fuck You, Hillary Clinton. I hate you. I'm Madness, and in this episode, I'll tell you what the solution is for the revolution that Bernie Sanders says is happening here in America. Now, Bernie's offered our revolution as a solution, but this is not new. During the Bush year, the Progressive Democrats of America, PDA, was set up to transform the Democratic Party and our country. I have a sweatshirt that says I'm part of the Elizabeth Warren wing of the party that they use to fundraise. Strategy is the formation of a new generation of progressive leaders by focusing on down-ballot elections, building up liberal forces by winning elections at different levels, including against more conservative Democrats. Well, this is a bunch of shit. And the strategy will not work, and history has not been kind to similar efforts of transforming the Democratic Party from the bottom up. I wish I could tell you that I was optimistic, but I've gone through this with Bernie Sanders recently, Liz Warren 4 years ago, Obama 8 years ago, Howard Dean 12 years ago, and Al Gore 16 years ago. All of them promised to use a campaign to build up down-ballot candidates, and none of those have ever made a dent in the system. First of all, down-ballot candidates don't run on political revolution. It's not that big of an agenda when you're running for city council or state legislature. These kinds of elections force candidates to narrow their issues, not broaden them. They can't do anything about healthcare, college tuition, the environment, and other concerns. When progressives do win elections, they have to toe the party line. They have to go along to get along, or they won't get the privilege and power needed to rise further up in the ranks. How progressives are the progressives in the Democratic Party? Well, many are hawkish on foreign policy, like supporting Israel, having a strong military presence in the world, and not really the kind of Ron Paul isolationist you would expect them to be. Military spending keeps rising, and there is no opposition to that from many progressives because of how much of that money is spent on military plants back home that save U.S. jobs. Had they been as hawkish on manufacturing and corporations with private sector jobs, maybe we wouldn't have so many plants that closed down and we could scale back our military involvement. But some of these jobs are the only high-paying jobs in some states. So, what's the history of down-ballot strategy? You remember my last broadcast? I told you one of the big uprisings and revolts that happened was behind the civil rights movement? Well, what changed after those uprisings and revolts occurred? The Democratic Party was transformed from the party of Jim Crow in the South to a party that embraced a rising group of black political leaders. In 1964, there were 100 elected black officials in America, but in 1975, there were 3,000. Almost all of them were liberal Democrats, including many former civil rights leaders and black power activists who turned from protest to politics. Blacks began winning mayor's races in big cities all over the country. Walter Washington was the first black mayor of a major city, Washington, D.C., in 1967, but he was appointed to his job. The first black mayor of a major city over 100,000 who was elected was Richard Hatcher, who became the mayor of Gary, Indiana in January of 1968. Carl Stokes became mayor of Cleveland, Ohio at the same time. He was the first elected black mayor of a major city. Stokes opened city hall jobs to blacks and women, but he feuded with the police and city council most of the time. He initiated a program called Cleveland Now, aimed at revitalization of Cleveland neighborhoods. He left politics in 1970 and in 1972 became the first black anchorman in New York City on WNBC. Then became a judge in Cleveland from 1983 to 1994. Bill Clinton named him ambassador to the Republic of Seychelles. He was diagnosed with cancer while ambassador and went home where he died. I know. What evidence did he have on the Clintons that got him killed? Black political power in the U.S. was growing. Other blacks became mayors of large cities. Coleman Young became mayor of Detroit in 1974 to 1994, and I had the honor of working under him in 1988. Coleman was part of the far left in Detroit. He was a member of a progressive party that, if you recall, was led by Henry Wallace back in 1948. He was also in the radical United Auto Workers and the National Negro Labor Council, which back then made him a target of the FBI and the House Un-American Activities Committee. He protested segregation in the Army and racial discrimination in the UAW. In 1952, he appeared before McCarthy's House Un-American Activities Committee and defied that drunken bigot with sarcasm while refusing to answer whether or not he was a member of a communist party. When the committee said Young seemed reluctant to fight communism, Coleman said, "I'm not here to fight in any un-American activities because I consider the denial of a right to vote to large numbers of people all over the South un-American." Whoa. He told a congressman from Georgia, "I happen to know in Georgia, Negro people are prevented from voting by virtue of terror, intimidations, and lynchings. It is my contention you would not even be in Congress today if it were not for the legal restrictions on voting on the part of my people." He also said these great statements to the committee: "Congressman, neither me or none of my friends were at this plant the other day brandishing a rope in the face of John Cheverny, a young union organizer and factory worker who was threatened with repeated violence after members of the HUAC alleged that he might be a communist. I can assure you I have had no part in the hanging or bombings of Negro in the South. I have not been responsible for firing a person from his job for what I think are his beliefs or what somebody thinks he believes in, and the things of that sort. That is the hysteria that has been swept up by this committee." Young's performance made him a hero to the growing black community in Detroit. He built his political base on the East Side, where he was elected to be a delegate to draft a new state constitution in 1960, and in 1964 was elected to the Michigan State Senate. In 1973, he ran for mayor, and his campaign was built around the role of violence inflicted upon an increasingly black city by a disproportionately white police department, and his pledge to eliminate the troubling decoy unit known as STRESS, Stop Robberies and Enjoy Safe Streets, whose officers had been accused of killing 22 residents and arresting hundreds more without cause in its 2.5 years' existence. When he became mayor, he disbanded STRESS and began efforts to integrate the police. As I said, he came from the far left, but once in office, he moved to the right. He called for an ideological truce and gained widespread support from the city's business leaders. He built large Detroit construction projects, but ignored the neighborhoods because there were no other options. Young was blamed for the city's ills, especially the white flight of middle-class taxpayers to the suburbs and the emergence of powerful drug-dealing gangs and a rising crime rate. Now, Maynard Jackson was elected in 1973 as the mayor of Atlanta. He was the mayor of Atlanta when the Atlanta child murders in 1979 to 1981, which was a serial killing of black children. The murderer was caught in 1981, Wayne Williams. In 1990, Jackson brought the 1996 Olympics to Atlanta. In 2001, he sought the post of DNC chairman, and he was backed by Bill Bradley, who was running for president. But he lost to Terry McAuliffe, who was backed by Hillary and Bill Clinton. He died of a heart attack 2 years later. I just love to fuck with you people about how people mysteriously die after fucking with the Clintons. Anyways, Harold Washington was mayor of Chicago in 1983. Wilson Goode was mayor of Philadelphia in 1984 and led the police raid on the MOVE headquarters, which caused a fire that destroyed 4 city blocks of buildings and killed 11 people, leaving 240 people homeless. This action led to the rise of Ed Rendell, who lost to Goode in 1987, but Rendell went on to become mayor in 1992 and then governor, and is a huge supporter of Hillary Clinton. Goode is out of politics. The reality of these mayors is they had to preside over cuts and austerity, especially during the Reagan years, who instituted huge cutbacks in federal aid for the cities, such as a virtual elimination of public housing. This led to cuts in social services that black neighborhoods needed, while increasing spending on law enforcement. So many of these liberal Democrats were compelled to become administrators of right-wing social policies. The politics of black Democrats were affected as well. They might have been genuine and radical at their starting point, but had to temper the agenda if they wanted to take advantage of the opportunities of being a candidate of the Democratic Party. Excuse me. Oh, I'm getting whatever Hillary got there for a second. Their allegation of corporate, financial, and law and order interests was the price of admission into the ranks of a political establishment. Now, how fucked up was that? The black Democrats were successful in using down-ballot elections to win a place in the Democratic Party, but their success left them powerless to make the kinds of changes they had promised. The progressive figures in the Democratic Party were put in a position to defend the rightward moving of a status quo. In the 1990s, the best example of that is how congressional black caucus members were proponents of Bill Clinton's law and order agenda, which set in motion the new Jim Crow and mass incarcerations. Howard Zinn, the great historian who wrote The People's History of the United States, famously said, "It's not who's sitting in the White House, but who is sitting in the streets, in the cafeterias, in the halls of government, in the factories. Who is protesting? Who is occupying offices and demonstrating? Those are the things that determines what happened." The biggest political change, as I have just shown you, doesn't come from down-ballot elections. None of the black liberals I mentioned had any impact in moving forward progressive black causes. In fact, they did just the opposite and sold out to get a seat at the table. I gave you a history lesson last time about the labor upsurges and civil rights and Occupy Wall Street uprisings. The biggest change in the U.S. were never accomplished by election of a few leaders, but the mobilization of working class and middle class people in strikes, protests, occupations, and political actions of all kinds. Democrats have always been on the wrong side of change, whether it was during the labor uprisings of the 30s or social struggles of the 60s and 70s. The call to transform the Democratic Party from the inside is one of compromise and giving up your integrity. Look at Liz Warren, Sherrod Brown, Russ Feingold. All of them are supposed to be against Citizens United and Wall Street influence, but they all supported Hillary because the only thing that happens when you get in office is you try to get things done, which include making deals or alliances, soliciting donations for future campaigns, and that famous line, to make incremental change in policy. Well, fuck that shit. Anytime a campaign ends up tying their cause to the Democratic Party, their goals and demands meet the requirements of a candidate, not the other way around. Martin Luther King was a Republican who made a Democratic president sign the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Acts Right. He didn't do that by promising to be part of Johnson's campaign, he made Johnson become a part of his campaign. Look at our Native American brothers and sisters at Sacred Stone Camp to try to shut down the DAP. They're not trying to start a political revolution to pass legislation. They are right there on the front lines protesting. Whether they are successful in shutting down the pipeline or not remains to be seen. But their resolve is the only way to get change if you think you can wait for some politician to change anything. You are fucking nuts. Our revolution is a waste of your time and money. I urge you, my brothers and sisters, to fight, to protest, sit in, demonstrate. Keep rising up and sitting in. Don't let the struggles keep growing, waiting for a leader to change this fucked up situation. Change will only happen when you make it. Fuck you, Hillary Clinton. I hate you.